Hey everybody, my name is Curt Conrad and you're listening to West 4th and Goal, a podcast devoted to high school sports fans in North Central Ohio. We're coming to you from the IdeaWorks podcast studio on West 4th Street in downtown Mansfield. If you're a small business owner looking for a place to hang your shingle, go to ideaworksohio.com to schedule a visit. But do it quick because space is running out. The West 4th and Goal podcast was originally intended to be a football-only show, but our faithful listeners have spoken and they would like to see us expand on what we did in the fall. So for the time being, our intent is to continue our weekly show throughout the basketball season. Then once the sun finally comes back up after a 4-month slumber sometime in April, we'll sit down and revisit that and decide if we want to continue to stretch it out for the remainder of the school year. Regardless of what we do going forward here, I would just like to take a moment to thank our audience for making all this possible. Our football podcasts were downloaded more than 30,000 times in the fall, and if you're listening to us right now, none of that would have been possible without you, so we certainly appreciate it. Joining me in the studio, as always, is Richland Source reporter and St. Louis transplant Noah Jones. Noah has made his way back to town after making the long trip to the Lou over the holiday season. Noah, how was it? How was that 7-hour trip to the banks of the Mississippi?
Well, I listened to a lot of open mic podcasts and West 4th and Goals to help me get through it, but I made it here safely, so I'm happy to
Outstanding.
be back.
I would imagine as a Cardinals super fan, you got to be pretty excited to have Andrew Miller in the bullpen next summer, huh?
Andrew Miller, Paul Goldschmidt, it's going to be one heck of a great season. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and I don't blame you. Andrew was great for the Indians here these last few years. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Noah's the Richland Source Podcast Network's producer extraordinaire. I tell people all the time I got the easiest job in podcasting. I get to sit here and talk about high school sports with high school athletes. Noah does all the heavy lifting. He has the unenviable task of trying to make me sound like I know what I'm doing, and I promise you that is no small undertaking. Noah's kind of transitioning this season, in basketball season. He's going to be doing more production things. That kind of brings me to our newest member of the team, and someone I am super excited to welcome into the podcast studio. He's a former Mansfield Senior standout in football and basketball. He was the Tygers head basketball coach from 2008 to 2012, and he will be sitting in with us for the remainder of the basketball season. He is Effie James, and Effie, thanks for agreeing to do this with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Curt. I really appreciate it. Anytime, I'm a lot like you, man. I enjoy talking high school sports. I enjoy being around it. You know, I've been fortunate enough to be able to coach and do a lot of things involving sports. Sports has meant a lot to my own personal life. So anytime I can sit in with guys that are interested in sports and have some fun and talk about it, I'll jump at the opportunity. So thank you guys. Noah,
Effie is one of the guys here in town that probably can sit down and name all of the seniors in the Mansfield Senior basketball program for the past 20 years, not unlike myself. We both have an abundance of maybe not so useful knowledge floating around in there.
Yeah, there's a reason you kicked me out of the podcast.
There was no kicking out of anyone. We just wanted
it was volunteer.
We just wanted to include some different voices here, and we're excited about it. We're going to continue with our show much the same way we did during the football season. We're going to bring in local high school athletes to talk about their seasons and to talk about things that aren't necessarily related to basketball. We kind of pride ourselves on doing that. That'll start next week. We didn't have a chance to get a guest in here this week because your host was asleep at the wheel and didn't get a guest lined up. That's part of the difficulty of dealing with the new year and all that sort of stuff. But once we get into January here, we'll get more into a routine. That said, I'm also kind of glad we didn't get anyone this week because I wanted to talk to F about he is a man of many hats, and including being a former basketball coach and a lot of other things. He is dipping his toes in the documentary filmmaking world. He will. I'm not sure when it'll roll out here. It's not far off now, but it's called TY for Tygers: A Story of Life, Community, and Basketball. It's his first swing at documentary filmmaking. And F, how's that whole process?
Wow, man, it has been an unbelievable journey. And when I thought about having it, Curt, it was probably about, to be honest, it was 2015, and I said, it would be interesting to talk about some of the old teams, specifically the 84-85 team that made it to the state championship in basketball. And right then I started thinking about ideas and kicking ideas off of people, and I thought I would do a little blurb that I could maybe put on Facebook or something like that. But the more I got into it and the more I talked to people, as with most projects that I've been involved in, they tend to grow. And before I knew it, this little thing that I wanted to do became a documentary. And so now here I am in the better part of year 3, preparing, and we are going to have a public viewing on February 2nd at Senior High. I really wanted to tie it to a basketball game, so our Tiger fans, that's really who it's for. It's for the fans of Mansfield basketball in general, not just necessarily Senior High Tiger fans, but Mansfield fans in general. And it's really an ode or my tribute to Mansfield area basketball.
Sure.
And I think people enjoy it, and it's certainly the foundation of it is based on the 84-85 team that went to Senior High team that went to the state, but it talks a lot about the community and what basketball means to this community. So it has been very interesting. I've enjoyed it. I've struggled with it. I've hated it. I've been ready to give up on it, but it has really been a joy, and all the people that have really helped me out, I appreciate them, and I think it's going to be pretty well taken once we do the viewing.
Right, and we talked a little bit about, I think, last summer, but I think you told me then that that's the team that kind of made you fall in love with basketball. Is that kind of the inspiration behind this whole project?
Absolutely. Myself, I talk about it a little bit in the documentary, how I was a soccer player as a young guy, and for me, I played soccer, and when I watched the other kids that played basketball and football and baseball even, I looked at them as, well, they just must not be good enough at soccer.
Right.
So that's why they play these other sports. But, I latched on to this team in 84-85, and it really, kind of forced me into trying basketball.
Right.
And once I tried it and I began to follow this team, I enjoyed it, and following them is what inspired me to really become a basketball player and an athlete in general.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked about it, the biggest challenge you were facing was finding some footage from that year. It's not like the 80s weren't that long ago, despite what some of the younger people might think. But how's that search going? I mean, did you ever come up with
Curt,
the footage?
I'm telling you right now, man, you would think that the 1980s were 100 years ago. It literally is like that. There's so much. And I think we're spoiled today because everything is on video. You can find anything on video. So when you go back into the mid 80s and definitely the early 80s, it is very, very tough to find video. Now, we're able to find some footage, and there's enough to make it, to get the story told.
Right.
But that by far was the biggest challenge. Finding people to get involved and talk about their experiences with basketball in the 80s and their experience in the community. That was so easy. There were so many people really willing to be a part of it. But the visual story was a challenge. But along with, that and some vintage archive news stories from local papers from Mansfield and beyond,
right.
I think we were able to visually tell the story as well. So it took some work, but I think we're on the good end of it.
I think the last time we talked, you'd already interviewed 20 plus people, and that was a year ago. How is that? I would imagine that number has only grown since then, huh?
Well, and that's true. And what I started to look at now that we're in the final, we're actually the story is actually done and we're in the editing. We're past the editing phase. Now we're in the cleanup phase of the editing. But I feel some kind of way because so many people gave so much great information. And when I took it to, Brian Skoronsky, who's really helping me with the editing part, and I showed him like all the raw material I had, he said, man, you got to cut this down.
Right.
You have got to cut this down. And that has been the hardest part for me.
Sure.
Is cutting this down into because it literally could be like, I remember watching the OJ series on ESPN when it came on. And I'm thinking, if I really showed all, or most of the raw material, it could be a 7-part series.
Right.
But I'm not interested in that. So, we did cut it down, and I think it's going to be digestible, and I think our final product will be something that tells the story, and I think people will be proud of what what basketball means to this community, and specifically what the basketball in the 80s kind of done for the basketball teams moving forward and since then.
Right. I mean, and, when I was doing research on that story I wrote last summer about that, I mean, there was a lot going on in Mansfield at that time, and not all of it was, most of it wasn't great. It was a rough time, and that seems to me like that's a big part of the narrative that you're trying to drive at there.
Well, Curt, that in itself could be there's so many angles and arms and legs to the story of Mansfield in the 80s.
Right.
Basketball is just a part of it, but as I done the research and talked with people, and there's so many stories that could be their own story.
Right.
Like you talked about the community itself and the change that community went through from being a industrial city to now what's basically a service oriented industry, and that's one of the things that's unique to Mansfield. And then when I get into the athletic aspects, where people start talking about their own experiences in athletics, and those stories could be documentaries of themselves. So I'm definitely enjoyed it. It has been, like I said before, challenging, but Mansfield is a unique place.
Right.
And the more you look into, the history of it, every day that I, think about and I do research, I find out something that I had no clue about this community. So it makes me proud to be a Mansfielder, to be honest, and even more prouder that, I was able to get involved and start a project like this.
Is this, are you going to drop everything else and be a documentary filmmaker going forward here from now on?
No way. What I am, Curt, man, I'm what I've always tried to be, well, not always tried to be, what I've been now is a person who listens. I'm a person that listens to what God tells me to do.
Right.
And that's something that I have not always been. But here recently, there's been like motivations that seemingly, I don't know why, but they come to me, and now I just, if I have something that comes to me, I just do it. And because of that, I wrote a play and showed it, and people ask me, where does that come from? I'm like, I just listen, and I think I want to inspire my own children.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. I want to inspire my kids, and I don't like as a coach, I didn't like being put in a box, even as a coach. People say, well, there's Effie James, he's a coach. And that was it, period, at the end.
Right.
And I've never liked that idea. So because of that, that's why I put my hand into playwriting, and now as a not necessarily a screenwriter, but doing a project that became a documentary. That's just who I'm becoming, and I no longer want to be afraid, and I don't want my children to be afraid to do what it is that they desire to do or try.
Right. Well, let's change gears here a little bit and talk about the high school basketball season. We are into January now, and it's it's the equivalent of the dog days of summer, I would think. It's a grind once you get to January. It's tough for sports writers, especially because you can't win a conference championship in January. You can lose one, but the games don't get really exciting here for another few weeks. As a coach, was it hard to keep people motivated, I guess, at this time of year?
Yeah, like you said, it's a grind right now, and I was just talking to Coach Sykes, Marquis Sykes for Mansfield Senior, and he says the same thing. It's around the holidays, and it's very difficult to keep your team focused. That's whether you're on a winning streak or a losing streak. It is very tough to keep your players motivated and focused because you're just far enough away from the tournament where they feel like there's no real reason to get so motivated, but you're far enough away from the beginning of the season to know who you are as a team. So it's a grind. Now, this is the part of the year for me. I always, as a coach, looked at it. This is where you start to get some players that start to realize, you know what, I'm not going to play as much as I thought I was.
Right.
And you start to see who are the diamonds in the rough, the guys that you didn't know were going to perform, start to perform. And also the guys you thought that were going to perform maybe took a step back, and you now are starting to build your rotation and your team for the stretch run. And it's a fun part of the season, but, man, it is a mental grind trying to keep your kids focused and motivated on the goal, whether it be conference championships and just getting better every day.
Marquise has something brewing over there, it seems like. I think they lost their opener, and it turned out to be a blowout. It was a 1-point game at halftime against Kaufman, and things came off the rails there in the second half. I think they've won, 7 in a row since then. He's got, probably about 14 kids that he can use and 7 seniors. Is that a blessing and a curse?
When I talked to him before and he told me early in the season, he told me he had 7 seniors, I looked at him, I said, man, you are going to have a problem.
Right.
I have, it's great to have quality senior leadership, and that's a good thing. But sometimes when you have a lot of seniors, it doesn't leave a lot of room for your young people to grow. And if your young guys are talented, that means you got some upset seniors that aren't playing. And either way, that builds animosity amongst your team. But I'm going to tell you what, I agree, Curt. They've got something special, and they have very rarely do you have a varsity team where you got playable guys on your entire bench.
Right.
Now, everybody says, well, if they can't play, you shouldn't be on the team. Well, that's not true. Everyone has a role, and sometimes your role isn't playing in games, but what Coach Sykes and their staff and the Tigers have now are absolutely playable guys from one end of the bench to the other. And you can see from their games, they wear teams out. Every one of their games at halftime, I believe, have been really, really close.
Right.
They've been leading at half by a slim margin or been behind, but by the end of the game, they win by double digits, and that's because they've got playable guys that in the fourth quarter, their stars are fresh.
Right.
Their scores are fresh, and their guys are still have energy. So you're right. I think they got something special going on over there.
I did color commentary on the radio for the senior high Madison game early in the year, and I
saw that. You've done a great job.
I don't know about that, but it was serviceable, I guess. And I was talking to Aaron Hines, and I said, everyone has always said that senior high is a second half team, and they are. They are absolutely a second half team. But that is a product of what happens in the first half. I've always believed that. I mean, you wear a team out for, make them start running offense 45 feet away from the basket, and you do that from the jump. I mean, it's gonna take its toll.
And everybody, trust me, every team would love to do that.
Right.
Believe me, every coach would love to shuffle players in and out. But the reality is, if your players are not bought in, and the interesting thing, and the thing that I've told Marquise is that they have a tremendous their staff, with Javar Hudgens and Deshaun Hilliard and those guys have the pulse of those. They've been coaching them since they've been really young.
Right.
So because of that, they have great relationships, and they have bought into the fact that, I may not have to play 17, 18, 19, 20 minutes a night, but I can still be meaningful in this game.
Right.
And I'm telling you what, those kids have bought in, and that is the key. You don't have to be, great every single night when you got energy every single night. Right. And that's what they got over there.
Senior high's leading scorer is Quan Hillary, and when I think of that position at senior high, he's not the the body type
Sure.
I guess that I think of. Quan
Sure.
is, I mean, if you haven't seen him, Quan's probably about 5'10", 5'11". He's a big, thick kid. He looks more like a linebacker than he does a scoring guard. But from everyone I've talked to, they said, that's how he's been his entire life, and he's always found a way to put the ball in the basket. I mean, he's kind of a different kind of scorer, though.
He is. In high school, he would have to be one of the toughest people to guard.
Right.
And the great thing about Quan that I really have come to appreciate is that he understands that he may not be the quickest guy, but he understands basketball, and he knows now how to use his body.
Right.
So you start to say, well, this guy can't get people. He constantly beats people off the dribble because he understands how to get people off balance. And when they're off balance, he uses his body against you, and he lives at the free throw line. He lives in the lane because you can't really get a beat on him. And then if you back off, he is a really quality three-point shooter. So you're right. He doesn't meet the criteria for your standard, especially senior high point guard. But I'm going to tell you what, he is just as effective. And I think right now he's got to be averaging close to 20 points a night.
Absolutely.
And you, like you said, to look at it, you wouldn't figure that. But after you watch him play for a little bit, especially opposing coaches now are starting to figure out he is going to be a tough guard. And he's done an outstanding job for them this year.
Yeah. Senior high, I think, is 3-0 in the conference. Lex is a game back at 2-1, so is Mount Vernon. That Lexington team is a team that went to state last year. They returned a bunch of talent. Everyone thought, well, it's theirs to lose again, and then they started the season with 2 losses in their first 3 games.
Sure.
And as a guy who's coached coached teams that went to state, you were an assistant on the 04-05 team with John Avery on Greg Collins' staff. Yeah. I mean, does the bullseye get that much bigger that following year once everyone? I would imagine everyone wants to knock off the champ.
I've always said, and everybody knows you are going to get everybody's best shot, and at senior high that was always the case. But one thing that I can say about Lexington very quickly is because if I was a basketball coach, first thing I would do as soon as we make the playoffs is cancel week 1 or postpone week 1, because it is, and you don't, of course you want to play, and the kids want to play. They say they want to play, and I'm sure they do. But there is a tremendous difference in a week or two coming off of football legs. And I know that sounds like a myth and all that, but football legs are true. So, one of the things I think, if they have made a mistake this year, it probably was not taking off time between football and basketball season. Because, like you said, they are a talented group. They've got great experience, and now I think they're starting to find their legs. But being the hunted is something that not all teams can handle.
Right.
And one thing I can say, when I coached under Greg, he really harped on every single conference game. When conference week, we played West Holmes when they first got in the league. They struggled a lot. Mm-hmm. But those games, as coaches, as players, we had to make sure that our kids were so focused and prepared. We treated it like championship week.
Right.
Because that's what happens. Every single place you go, when you're the champ, you are going to get the team's best shot.
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared for that, and you're not up for that, you are going to get beat. And that's one of the things that Lex is going to have to kind of manage this season, because they're no longer that team looking to upset, a senior high, or even, for instance, or other teams. Teams are now looking at you. You've been to that state now, so that is forever entrenched now into the Lexington name, and that's to their credit. But there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that.
Sure. We just had signing day a week or so ago, and 6 members of Lexington's basketball team signed national letters of intent. And not a single one of those guys signed a letter of intent to play basketball in college.
Right.
I would imagine you're a former 2-sport guy, and I would imagine did you encourage your guys to get involved in a lot of different sports?
I was highly disappointed when I had specialty players. I'm gonna be honest, because there's nothing can cover, or nothing can emulate competition.
Right.
So I didn't care if you were, playing. I don't care what sport you were playing. I wanted my kids competing, and we got time to get your jump shot better. We got time to make you a better ball handler. You can do all of that. But when you got an opportunity to compete, whether it's track, baseball, wrestling, whatever you can, when you got a chance to compete, those are going to be your better players. And I think I saw a stat that talked about the percentage. I think it's somewhere in the 70th or 80th percentile of the Ohio State guys that are multi-sport athletes in high school. There's no question that's one of the reasons why they're one of the top programs in the nation. Those guys compete, and they're used to competing. They may not be the best football players in the nation, but they may be some of the best competitors in the nation. And when it comes down to it, you need that when you're talking about winning game and winning championships.
And Lex has the luxury of not only having one of the best football players in the nation, but he's a great basketball player too. I mean, Cade Stover, Ohio's Mr. Football. He's the Gatorade Player of the Year, and for all of his well-deserved accolades, I mean, he's a heck of a basketball player too.
Unbelievable. I when I think about him getting Mr. Football, now I thought he had to be one of the best football players in Ohio, hands down.
Right.
But, sometimes a lot of politics get into it,
Sure.
and sometimes when you hear Mr. Football, it's always from a name school. So I have to say I was surprised when he did get that honor, not because he didn't deserve it. I mean, the kid is an outstanding. When you watch him play on film or at the game, he absolutely has been the best player on the field every single time I've seen him play,
Right.
and that has been for years now. So, he definitely was deserving, and I'm glad that we have a system in place that rewards the players that may not be from the big name
Right.
schools, but are still quality players. That was a big moment for him, and I just so happened to work in a field with his mother. I went to college with his parents at Bowling
Right.
Green. And I ran into his mother, and she just beams with pride, and she should, and they're just a great family, and they have taught him the right way, and he's now reaping the benefits of that. So I'm really proud of him and happy for him and his family.
Yeah, absolutely. He and the other night he over at Ashland, he was playing. They played over at Ashland the other night, and he spun into the paint and collided with a teammate, and his head was gashed open. And I talked to him afterwards, and he said the guy he ran into, Ben Vore, who's going to Cincinnati to pitch, so another real good athlete down there. But he said we got back to the locker room, and Ben couldn't find his tooth, and Kate said I reached up onto my head and I pulled Ben's tooth out of my head. So he's a pretty tough kid too.
Oh my goodness, that is wow, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And speaking of teams that rely on two sport athletes, we'll change gears to the Mid-Ohio Athletic Conference here. And Clear Fork lost their opener to Lex. They've won, I think, 7 or 8 in a row. And again, they're a team that relies on a bunch of football guys, and they're all pretty darn good athletes down there. And I mean, again, those are kids who are going to the blue ball kid's going to go play baseball in college at a Division I school, and they got kids that do a lot of different things. But I don't know what your impression is, but when I think of Clear Fork kids, man, they're just tough,
and always have been. And I have and I think we talked about this earlier. I think last year we talked about the evolution of the Clear Fork athlete, if that's a term to use. But those kids and the program, and I credit Coach Bechtel and Coach Carroll specifically, because they have really transformed that athlete. And you can tell they've had a change in philosophy as it comes to strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in their athletes, you don't just become that type of athlete when you've been your program has had the certain type of athlete for years. You've had a change in philosophy, and those guys are now truly athletic, and they are absolutely competing. And they're once again a proof that, if you got guys that compete in more than one sport, they're going to be competitive in all of those sports. And I really enjoy watching that evolution and seeing them as a school and a program get to a place where they're no longer a gimme in any sport, really.
And they, I know Dave Carroll was always very outspoken about wanting to get into the MOAC. Mm-hmm. And, they're competing with schools that are more like size, but, I mean, they're And it was like that when they first got into the OCC with the bigger schools. I mean, they had to run athletes that could compete in the OCC,
True.
and I think this bunch could probably do the exact
Absolutely.
same thing too if they were still playing the senior highs and the Madisons and Lexingtons of the world.
Absolutely, and I think that and it has a lot to do, like you said, with their toughness, man.
Right.
The sports, high school sports is you every once in a while you get a tremendous player. You
Right.
get a guy that is you get a Cade Stover, you get a Keon Johnson, you get somebody who is just built to play, to be a player. But for the most part, they're kids that are out there competing,
Right.
doing their best to win a game. Some of them are more athletic than others, but for the most part, who's the toughest? Who's the mentally toughest and who's the physically toughest kid or collection of kids that want to win and is going to do what it takes to win? And if you have that, you've always got a chance, no matter what school you come from or you go to.
Right, and Shelby is a new member of the MOAC, and those kids are a lot like the Clear Fork kids.
Yeah.
I mean, they're big and they're strong and they're tough, and they're going to come out and compete with you for however many minutes you're playing.
Right, and I think Coach Swimbley there has really done an outstanding job building that program, and being a former coach, man, you always shy away from taking credit for what your team has done and all of that. That's just kind of a default reflex. But the truth of the matter is he's built a quality program that's going to compete year in and year out, and not everybody can do that. And I've always respected, no matter what, and he's had an array of talent where he's had guys that can flat out play at all 5 positions to where he's had to grind it out
Right.
for wins. And that's a mark of a real true program. And, I think he's really done a great job building that program to a place where they expect to win.
Right.
Every night out, they expect to win. And that's not easy.
Right.
That's not easy.
And Shelby, I mean, they gave senior high all the Tigers wanted in the 419 challenge, and that was without their
Right.
6'7" kid and their 6'3" kid.
Right.
So, I mean, and talking to Marquise afterwards, he said, I don't think anyone's going to want to play them in
Yeah.
a tournament. And that, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to it as we go on through the season, but that D2 tournament it's a grinder with the teams that are in there. I mean, Lex and Senior High and Shelby and Clear Fork, and that doesn't even take into account the Sandusky's and the Clydes and Norwalks up that way. I mean, it's if you are a district champion, you have earned it to going through that tournament.
That tournament, as I look at it, especially now, Senior High being Division II and things, it's going to be so much local fun.
Right.
You know what I mean? And having local teams compete against each other in the tournament. And we've had that, but I think, having Senior High now in that mix, it just puts a different dynamic on it. And it's almost like I can see every single tournament game being jam-packed.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's fun for the community. And like you said, if you win that district, you have earned it.
Yeah.
And you're going to be prepared for that regional. And I'm going to tell you, I think the fact that, Lexington won the district, that prepared them for that regional.
Absolutely.
And really, they were ready. They were ready. They didn't shy away and they performed.
And we didn't even include Ontario.
Right.
And Coach Baylog out there just won his 550th career.
It's unbelievable.
550 career games, all at Ontario. He started in, I think, '86. I mean, that's unheard of now. I mean, no one stays at a job for that long. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that he's just stayed there.
Right.
It's he's been successful there for so long.
Yeah, and that is, again, being a coach, I honor that, man. I
Right.
mean, that is something. Number one, to do it at one school is tremendous. But I think Coach Baylog will tell you one of the things that you have to have in order to sustain that type of success is complete community, administrative, school support.
Right.
Everybody's behind you, and when you go there, you can tell. Anytime you walk into a gym and the floor has your name on it, I would say that the community, the school, the administration supports you, and I'm sure he'd be the first to tell you his success is directly correlated to his support that
Right.
he gets from the Ontario community and the school board and everybody involved. It's a community effort. And I've always told people when we talked about, and we talk about it even in my documentary, senior high hasn't won a state title since 1909. But I tell people all the time, state titles are won by communities.
Right.
Schools don't win titles. When you look at the teams, specifically the public schools, their communities win.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see their communities behind them. Their schools are behind them. The athletic departments do everything they can to help their sports teams be successful. They give them the off-season equipment. They give them the off-season scheduling. They do everything they can.
Right.
To make sure that their athletic teams have what they need to be successful. So the teams just go out and are a product of what the community has supported. And if they perform, they win. And Ontario has really been a model of that for years.
Right. And I had the opportunity to cover all 7 state championship football games this past, last month now. And the one thing that struck me in the post-game press conferences each time was that very thing. Is it's these kids were talking about the community support, and that's not that's certainly not exclusive to state championship games, but it's at a whole different level at places like that. I was the Kirtland team who beat Marion Local, I think, in the D6. One of their best players, a big, strong offensive lineman. He's going to Kent State, I think, and he was talking about the workouts in this incredible facility they have, and he's walking out in May or June. He can barely lift his arms because they worked out so hard, and the whole team's that way.
Wow.
I mean, it's like a whole different level of commitment from top to bottom, and that includes community and athlete.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that being prepared and being able to be competitive at the highest level is a sacrifice, man. It not only for the players, but you want to have the best equipment available, the best competition available. You got to be able to travel, and that's not easy. At the bottom line is it costs money.
Right.
It costs money to prepare your kids to perform at the highest level, and if you don't have community support and people behind that, that makes it tough. And these schools, and it's always interesting to me that in particular the smaller communities seem to just really back their sports teams, and I always love to see that.
And speaking of that, we'll go to the Mid-Buckeye Conference, and one of the best small communities in the area is down 39 here, just outside of town in Lucas. And I mean, if you went to any of Lucas's football playoff games, everyone in Lucas was at those, and it doesn't change once you get into a different season, or they support the boys teams and the girls teams with equal enthusiasm.
Oh,
sure. And it's so much fun to watch. Scott Spittler done a great job during football season, and that's carried over to the basketball season. That's a very good small Division IV basketball team.
And again, I last year I think I was able to watch Lucas play one of their basketball games at home, and again I'm always just amazed by the amount of support that these communities give. And the one thing that I didn't get when I was coaching, because I was either scouting or evaluating the games, is to be able to just sit back and enjoy the game with the players or with the fans in the stands and the parents. And it's amazing, man. When you go to these schools like Lucas, is the parents are in the stands and they know all of the kids. They know all of the kids' parents, and they're genuinely cheering for the team to win.
Right.
And man, I tell you, sometimes that right there is an asset. They want the best for their teams, and Lucas, really, football and basketball has, football specifically has grown into a tradition.
Right.
They win there. You know what I mean? They win football games there, and even their basketball program has really become competitive year in and year out. And to be honest, bigger schools could really learn some lessons from the way that communities operate, as it regards to their athletic programs, and the schools themselves could learn a lot from how to support your athletic teams and how to truly give them the support that they need to be successful.
Right. Lucas has a big one coming up this week against St. Peter's, and I don't think I think a lot of people thought St. Peter's was going to fall on some hard times after graduating the kids that they did here in the last few years, and they are 5-3. They're undefeated in the conference, and Joe Jakubik has done a pretty darn good job considering all the guys he lost, including his son.
Sure, and I think that I've always said winning is a culture if you let it,
Right.
and once you win and you become accustomed to winning, that builds culture amongst your young players. So a young player who watched his son play, and Tyson Kent and Elijah Cobb and those guys go on to regional, those kids being 7th, 8th grade now think, I want that.
Right.
I want to play games at Bowling Green and possibly even Columbus. So, I'm going to do what's necessary. This coach says I need to do this in order to get better. That's what I'm going to do. So winning breeds a culture of winning, and Joe has done a great job of building that program. Like you said, I think everybody thought that once those seniors left that, they would be left with not much. But winning in your pre-seasons or in the seasons before can get you wins the season after.
Right.
If you build that culture, and he's done a great job of that.
Yeah, he certainly has. That'll be fun to watch that race kind of unfold as we go forward here. I think that's probably gonna wrap it up here for us this week.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, we certainly have some fun. We're planning to have some fun. We'll get some kids down here and talk high school basketball going forward. That'll do it for this week. It's West 4th and Goal, and tune in next week. Thanks.